Chris Steyerwalt is here, NewsNation politics editor. Is Tom Friedman saying to President Biden probably what you've had to teach your young children, which is you can't have it all?
I think part of the good news for Democrats is that people do not listen to Tom Friedman like that anymore. It would be hard to overstate the banality of Tom Friedman and how his ability to make crushingly obvious points, stultifying. I mean, I suppose it's true that he still does have a column. But I mean, I don't think people take Tom Friedman seriously in that way anymore. He's kind of a goof a little bit.
Fair. In the same sense, does he point out, yes, the obvious, but also President Biden is boxed in here. If he tries to cave it all to Putin, we saw what happened when progressives said that there should be a diplomatic solution or a diplomatic solution explored in Ukraine. We saw when President Biden tried to go to the fossil fuel industry. They have no interest in him. And we also know politically he can't do anything about, he can't do anything about gas prices, and that's crushing him at the polls.
Well, the Saudis definitely gave him a good kick in the teeth when they clamped down on oil production into a number probably that not even the Russians were expecting. That was really tough on the Democrats, and you can track the decline of the Democrats' performance in the polls with the increase. There's an inverse correlation between the price of a gallon of unleaded gas and the Democrats' position in the generic ballot. So that's for real. You know, what's happening with the Progressive Caucus and what's happening with the nationalists in the Republican Party, you know, we talk about the horseshoe, that the political spectrum isn't a straight line, it bends. And the two ends come back together. And so now you're hearing on the nationalist right and the progressive left more and more noise about cutting off Ukraine, bringing the war to a urgent end. And the problem for the mainstream coalition of Republicans and Democrats who see Ukraine as a place to do a couple of things: stop Putin on the cheap and really deal a blow to Russian ambitions, but two, send a message to the world that the United States is not going to back down, that the United States, NATO, and the West is willing to pay the price and bear the burden to see to it that these authoritarian regimes with dreams of empire are thwarted. So now you have the progressive left joining with the folks in like the Freedom Caucus and elsewhere who want to cut off Ukraine and pull back. This is the problem for Biden's leadership, which is how do you rally people to this conflict at a time where he wants to talk about anything else, right? He doesn't want to talk about this issue. He wants to talk about how the economy is going to get better. He wants to talk about abortion. He wants to talk about other issues that'll help Democrats. So he's in a pickle.
Right. And at the same time, you're an old newspaper guy. I thought it was so interesting when I read that quote last night, because it was such sort of a clear leak. One U.S. senior official, there were now troubling developments involving Russia's nuclear arsenal. It's a pretty searing line buried in the 29th paragraph. You think that was intentional or an oversight, or just the New York Times didn't think it was that significant?
Well, you know, the thing about the end of the world is you can't talk about it every day, because sooner or later you're going to have to deliver. The danger here is you can overhype the threat of a nuclear Russia, but also you could be unprepared for what might happen over there. So there's been a lot of reporting today about the possible use of dirty bombs, and that this is a pretext that if Putin could find a way to have some sort of nuclear explosion, nuclear discharge in Ukraine, this could be a pretext for more draconian measures, that he could use this as a pretext for more intense invasions and other things. So the stakes are enormously high. And obviously, we're not talking here, as Biden once said, we say Armageddon. That's not the discussion. But we have very successfully, since the end of the Second World War, prevented any discharge of nuclear weapons in anger. That is a threshold that we do not want to cross. So figuring out as an administration and as a government how much to talk about the threat versus if you talk about it too much, you're giving Putin what he wants, which is inciting this fear. It's a very difficult line to walk.
And as you point out, one that the president's trying to walk 2 weeks before the midterm elections. Chris, always good to see you. Thank you. Thanks for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to subscribe. Click the red button to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.